What is shame?
Right. Well, shame gets a bad rap these days. I think it's quite a useful emotion, corrective on certain kinds of behaviour. But that kind of shame is sad because it's about being caught in a mindset and feeling isolated within it, I think. And I think in England, in that kind of stratified class system, there's a lot of shame at all levels. The middle classes are full of shame, kind of self-hating shame. The working classes, lower middle class particularly, because they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Yeah, the shame of not being understood or not being able to make yourself understood is a kind of corrosive type of shame, I think. There's the shame of being, how do you say, vulnerable, the loser. Like, people don't speak about it very often in its collectivity, but for instance, when I was a kid speaking to my Jewish friends and coming from my position, we would often think, you have a secret thought of why did my people submit to this treatment? You know, that's the question you're not meant to ask in history class. Why did 6 million die? Why were there 6 million slaves? But I think in a small child there is a kind of reflexive shame because you can't understand it. And I think when I was a child, particularly when I looked at the situation of Jamaica and Jamaican migrants, you feel some shame in the sense of, you know, what is wrong with my family? That's what you would say in a simple sense. But historical knowledge, understanding what had occurred in Jamaica, the history of Jamaica, removes that shame because it gives you information, context, historical depth. You know, the way I was educated, I didn't know anything about Jamaica. I didn't even really understand that Jamaicans were not native to Jamaica, for example. British education in the 70s and 80s was quite concerned with the inequalities of American culture, but kind of pulled a veil over what had happened in Britain. So I found that even writing this book and doing all the research incredibly freeing. It kind of, you replace shame with this kind of empowering knowledge. Pride, I don't find pride a very useful emotion, though I understand for a lot of people it is important. And I just come from a different perspective. I assume people are, including myself, just deeply flawed. And so shame is usually quite appropriate on a day-to-day level. But I don't know, that might just be my issue. The question is, how can you function practically? I don't think there's any point in self-flagellation and feeling sorry for yourself and thinking how terrible you are. But shame is a kind of productive thing to create change. I guess I do believe in that. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that you're saying that there's a very positive element to the word shame. I've never ever considered this. Could you elaborate a bit on
to be shameless is to be very, very dangerous, I think. In America, our president at the moment is a shameless person. I don't know, maybe it's... I know it's definitely a Christian emotion, though, and that's why it's so so out of fashion. But I always thought it quite productive in the Gospels, the idea that you assume that you are entirely in sin. I always assume that, because it's almost always true. There's so many kind of small vanities, and I don't know. We're always boasting or trying to put something over on somebody, or that seems to be our daily practice. So I think to have in your mind the idea that you're probably not as great as you think you are is a useful thought. I find it useful anyway. Writing is all shame. I was out with a load of writers yesterday, and everybody feels ashamed when they write. It's a shameful practice. Like, who are you to write 400 pages about anything? Why should anybody have to read them? It's every moment of it is shameful. Also, the exposure, if you write intimately, which all writing, even if it's a distant historical novel, is from your brain, it's your ideas. So it's like being exposed in front of people, and it's often quite shy people who write. So there's a strange conflict there. You see it in comedians too, stand-up comedians. My brother's one. where they're not extrovert people. You know, if you met them in a pub, they're kind of quiet and cautious and scared of life, but then they go on stage and say all these outrageous things. I think it's a strange psychological quirk in which shame is used to kind of propel you on to something, to say things that you don't really want to say in public. But yes, for me, writing is mostly shame. And I guess the thing I have against pride is that it's all usually so inaccurate. Like, I can say, like in my sentimental moments, I'm so proud of my people, meaning the kind of black diaspora. Look at all the amazing things we do. Look at Stevie Wonder and Usain Bolt and Neil deGrasse Tyson and all these extraordinary, Michelle Obama and blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is, I am not any of those people. And I have no responsibility for them. You know, it's a sentimental idea, and I'm moved by it, but it's also not true. I can't take... these people are individuals who achieve by themselves. You have a collective sense of pride, but it's usually... it can run so quickly into something that is dangerous and unhealthy. Nationalism or all kinds of collective thought. So I'd rather talk in those situations of love, to say I love these people, I love what they've done, I appreciate and love it. But pride in it, I don't see why that's useful. Sometimes older writers will tell you, you know, you're in your study and you take down an earlier book and just on a whim you start reading it, and then you can have a feeling like, oh, it's not bad, but it always feels quite distant, partly because when you're writing it's such an obsessive thing, and then when you're done it's very it's like pushing something out of your body. You don't want to be involved with it anymore. But I have that sometimes. Like, I'll pick up a novel and read a chapter or something, but I can't imagine reading any of them from beginning to end. The only thing I read with some pride occasionally is an essay, because it's short and it's less painful. Less painful to do. Yeah. But I think you can't deny the satisfaction of, I think Martin Amis said it, of having written. That, I think, is very strong. It's not a very active emotion, but it's nice to know that you have written some things. That's nice.
When you started out writing, you might have been a singer or a dancer, perhaps not a...
Right.
I mean, but this is a quite wonderful palette to have to choose from.
I think, we were talking about it last night, there's some other writers around the table who have these other talents. There's a theory that I think it's Foster Wallace had, that every writer is someone who could do something else very well but not quite well enough. And that I found to be true. Got a lot of ex-sportsmen, actors, dancers, singers, people who had some skill in a different area but not quite enough to do what they wanted to do. I think writing gives the most possibility of improvement. I was never going to be Stevie Wonder, no matter how hard I tried, but with writing you can get better.
And you might even get to meet Stevie Wonder.
Yeah, you can get better, and I think for a lot of writers the problem is performance. Think of Wallace playing tennis, for even that. They like the act, but they don't want to do it in front of people. Writing is wonderfully solitary. When I'm reading, I read those crazy right-wing websites, kind of interested in the psychology of those people. And I think you have to imagine that for 8 years, they were covered in shame. It might seem impossible to imagine, but they hated the country they were in. They were ashamed of their president. They felt like strangers in their land. They were completely alienated. That's the only way I can really comprehend it. Because I think that there are many people who felt that way. And I think not being able to see that will not help the left. You have to try and conceive of it. As unpleasant as it doesn't mean you have to agree with it or submit to it, but you have to be able to see that for what it is. That all the sometimes, occasionally unthinking pleasure I took in Obama, pleasures of, I don't mean politically, but pleasures of personal identification, which I think were very strong for a lot of liberals. He likes my music, he reads my kind of books, he's my kind of person, he talks like me. All of that, which seems such a pleasure, quite aside from what actually went on politically in that administration, was equally infuriating to many people who found him to be alien entirely to their sensibility, to their taste, to their ideas, to the way they talked. I think you have to conceive of that and how much rage builds up over 8 years and then feeling the full force of it now. I think you have to think of emotions as real even when they're extremely alien to you. I think that's the first step in having some form of communication.
Is that actually a writer's thing? I mean, you slip into the skin of others.
Yeah, it's partly that, but I also think, I meet people with fairly extreme views when I'm on the road or when you're in a taxi, or it is possible to talk to people, but you need to talk to them and you need to listen to them as well first. The feeling of not being even listened to is very difficult, I think, to stand. I'm amazed how much of it comes down to language. I think that's the one thing that really strikes me about the right-wing sites, is that when you get down to the core complaints, the things that really upset them are linguistic. Like Black Lives Matter has driven them literally up the wall. They find those 3 words so provocative that it's deranging people. I find that fascinating. My gut instinct is rageful. I feel like, are you saying to me that after 250 years of this twisted racial history, I can't even say these 3 words without you feeling hurt and mortified and rage? Like, I feel the rage, but my rage matching their rage is pointless. I think it's more interesting to think about what it is about white people that find the idea of any collectivity that excludes them so upsetting. I've always thought that's very interesting. Even when I was in school on a bus and I'd see a group of white people getting angry because 4 Bengalis were talking Bengali. I was always fascinated. What is making you so angry? And I think part of it is, like if you've ever been in a marriage or any relationship, it's insecurity, jealousy, and a kind of vanity that you should always be included in all things. So I think trying to understand the motivations behind it is interesting. Why do you turn that moment of mystery where you're not sure what's going on immediately into rage? Why does it have to be transformed into rage? Could it be transformed into something else, like curiosity, concern, interest, acknowledgement that maybe this particular thing isn't to do with you? It's okay sometimes for things not to be to do with you. Of course, minorities are so used to things not being to do with them that they don't tend to get rageful at that, Now there's this pushback, the idea of representation, about being seen here on TV shows and magazines. When I was a kid, the idea that I wasn't present in anything was just the way it was,
But do you think actually when you are a writer and keep evolving that you are in a sense erasing what you did to go on to something else, but you bring something along from what you already did?
That's how I feel. I'm always trying to destroy what came before, just in order that you have somewhere to go. But I think writing is more conservative. When I think of people like Laurie Anderson, for example, real artists, that's the only word for them. There is a kind of truly destructive urge in artists like that. They're just constantly making and tearing down. Writing is a little more linear. It's more like building on something. But I'm always hoping for a kind of revolution in the sentence, something new to happen. Yeah.
Also perhaps because writing is a bit old-fashioned.
It is very old-fashioned. But I really don't mind that. When I write, I'm really thinking primarily of my generation and I guess the people older than me, and that I'm writing for them and taking this little thing to the grave. And when I think about younger people, I'm always delighted if they read me, but always quite surprised as well. I don't expect it, and I also don't expect the novel in this form to go on infinitely. I think there are many more interesting and immediate mediums that generation are going to use, The novel's going to be hard to... I'm saying this to publishers, it's tough. I just think there are other ways of doing it. You can do an incredible mixture of visual, oral, text. I just can't imagine people continuing to write these tomes. I'd be surprised. But we'll see. But as long as I can write mine till I go, I'll be happy enough with that.
But do you feel that the young people have now, from Twitter and texting and emojis and
right,
a different language?
No, I mean, I'm reading a book by someone who's 22 when she wrote it. It's absolutely fantastic. The form is different. There are little clues, like even if I didn't know her age and I would know she was of this generation. Like my husband pointed out, we've been reading a lot of books by young people, young women. How many times in these books the character, usually in the first person, will say something emotional will happen, and instead of responding either in the narrative or vocally as you would in a traditional novel, the character will pinch a bit of their skin until it bleeds, or do this, or hold their jaw. It's so strange, as if the body was a dissociated thing, you know. He said that to me and I put my fingernails into my hand until it bled. Or I keep on finding these lines over and over again. That's very fascinating to me, you know. The idea of verbalizing an emotion is quite distant. And the body is treated like this strange thing you have to drag around after you've finished your text messages and emails and your virtual life. Why have I got this flesh bucket that I'm carrying around? I'm very struck by that perspective and I keep on finding it. I think that's very different from the way we wrote, no? So that's really interesting to me. It's not a particularly sad thing, and the arc of these novels quite often seems to be the character starts out very arch and completely embedded in ideology, argument, internet argument, and by the end of the book realizes simple things like, I have a body, I might actually want a baby, love is complicated, you can't just love anyone in any direction. They learn these very things which would have been for us first principles, they learn at the end, but I don't think that means they're slower, it's just that they're saying, here are these things we've been given, they don't seem to have any relevance to our lives. Oh wait, actually, I do have this flesh packet and it has these various irrational desires and needs. So I find that all really interesting. I'm very engaged by it, by the way they're writing. So disassociated from themselves. It's cool.